I never imagined that the biggest mistake of my life would start with the words, I do. People always say, when you're marrying the right person, they talk about certainty, butterflies, and feeling like you found home. I felt relief, not because I was in love, because everyone around me finally stopped asking questions. My name is Hayden, and when I was 29, I married a woman I'd been dating for almost 4 years. She was kind, beautiful, funny, the kind of person every mother hopes her son brings home. Everyone congratulated me. Everyone said I was lucky, and every single person was wrong. The truth was much uglier. I loved her, just not the way a husband should. I had spent years convincing myself that love could grow if I tried hard enough, that attraction wasn't everything, that marriage was a commitment, not a feeling. I'd watched my friends settle down. My younger brother got married before I did. My parents had started dropping little comments every family dinner. So, when's your turn? You two make such a perfect couple. Don't keep that poor girl waiting forever. Eventually, saying yes felt easier than admitting what I had spent my entire life hiding. Because if I admitted it, I'd have to admit I wasn't the man everyone believed I was. The wedding itself was beautiful. Outdoor ceremony, late spring, warm enough that nobody needed jackets. My fiancé looked incredible walking down the aisle. People cried. I smiled for every photograph. Inside, I felt strangely detached, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. Then I met her father. Well, technically I'd met him before, several times actually, but something changed that day. His name was Wes. He was 50, tall, calm, the kind of man who never raised his voice because he never needed to. Gray had started creeping into his dark hair around his temples, somehow making him look even more distinguished. He wasn't flashy, didn't try to be charming, yet every room seemed quieter when he walked into it. I noticed him the first time my girlfriend introduced us years earlier. Back then, I pushed the thought away almost immediately. He's your girlfriend's dad. Don't even think about it. So, I didn't. Or at least I tried not to. But weddings have a strange way of making people emotional. After the ceremony, while everyone else was drinking champagne and taking pictures, I stepped away from the crowd for a minute. I needed air. The suit suddenly felt too tight. You disappearing already? I turned. Wes stood a few feet away, 2 glasses in his hands. He smiled slightly. I figured the groom deserved another drink. I laughed. Is it that obvious? You've looked overwhelmed all day. He handed me one of the glasses. Our fingers brushed for barely a second. Nothing. Completely ordinary. Still, something about that tiny moment stayed with me. Nervous? He asked. A little. That's normal. I hope so. He leaned against the wooden fence overlooking the vineyard. When I married my wife, he said, I almost drove away that morning. I blinked. You? He nodded. I sat in my truck for nearly 20 minutes, wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. What changed? He smiled toward the reception. I realized fear and certainty sometimes look exactly the same. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. Instead, I looked down at the ring on my finger. It already felt heavier than it should. You'll be all right, Wes said quietly. I hope you're right. He clapped my shoulder. You've got a good heart, Hayden. Those words followed me for weeks. Maybe because I wasn't sure they were true. Married life wasn't terrible. That's almost what made it worse. There were no screaming arguments, no betrayal, no dramatic fights, just distance. She noticed it before I did. "You've been quiet lately." "I'm just tired." "You've been tired for 6 months." "I've had a lot going on." She accepted that answer, at least for a while. Life settled into routines: work, dinner, family visits every few weekends. And every family visit meant seeing Wes. He always greeted me with the same warm smile. "Hayden, good to see you." Nothing unusual, nothing inappropriate. We'd end up talking while everyone else cooked, or fixing something in the garage, or sitting outside after dinner with coffee while the rest of the family watched television. It became easy, too easy. One evening, we spent nearly 2 hours replacing broken deck boards behind his house. The sun had already started setting. We worked mostly in silence. "You've done this before?" he asked after watching me use the drill. "My grandfather made me help every summer." He laughed. "Mine too. Funny how some habits never leave you." There was something comforting about him. No pretending, no pressure. Conversations flowed naturally. He listened, really listened. I started looking forward to family dinners, not because of the food, not even because of my wife, because I knew Wes would be there. That realization scared me. One night, after we'd driven home from another family barbecue, my wife smiled as she looked out the passenger window. "My dad really likes you." "Oh," he tells me all the time. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What does he say? That you're genuine?" I swallowed. "That's nice of him." She laughed. "He says you're easier to talk to than half the people he's known for years." I forced a smile inside. My stomach twisted because hearing that made me happier than it should have. Much happier. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a harmless admiration anymore. It wasn't just respect. It wasn't just appreciation. I had started looking for Wes the second we arrived anywhere. I noticed when he laughed, when he rolled up his sleeves, when he smiled at something stupid I said. And once I admitted that to myself, I couldn't stop noticing. I had married the wrong person. The terrifying part wasn't realizing that. The terrifying part was realizing exactly who my heart had chosen instead. For the next few months, I became an expert at lying, not to other people, to myself. I tell myself I was only looking forward to family dinners because Wes was easy to talk to. I tell myself it was normal to admire someone older. I tell myself it was nothing more than respect. Then I'd catch myself checking the driveway to see if his truck had arrived before we'd even gotten out of the car. That wasn't respect. That was something I couldn't afford to name. Autumn arrived, and with it came my mother-in-law's birthday. The entire family gathered at Wes's house. His backyard was strung with warm lights, the grill was going, and relatives filled every corner of the patio. It should have felt lively. Instead, I felt restless. I hated that I was searching for one person in a crowd. Then I spotted him. He was carrying a tray of drinks toward one of the tables, sleeves rolled to his forearms, laughing at something his brother had said. The ridiculous thing was how normal he looked. Nothing dramatic, just comfortable, the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly who you were. I wished I knew who I was. "Raise." I turned. My wife smiled. "You've been staring into space." "Sorry. You okay?" "Yeah." She slipped her hand into mine. I held it automatically. It felt familiar, safe, and completely wrong. Later that evening, the grill refused to cooperate. "I need another set of hands," Wes called. "I'll help," I answered before anyone else could. He smiled. "I figured you would." We walked to the side of the yard where the old gas grill sat. "It's been acting up for weeks," he muttered. We spent 20 minutes cleaning the burners and checking the gas line. Finally, the flame burst to life. "There we go." He grinned like we'd accomplished something far more important. "You saved dinner. I expect full credit." "Oh, absolutely." He laughed. "You'll get the first steak." I shook my head. "I think that's above my pay grade." He nudged my shoulder lightly. "Don't argue." The gesture lasted less than a second. Still, I noticed it long after it happened. That night, after everyone had eaten, people gathered around the fire pit. My wife sat beside her mother. The cousins played cards. Someone turned on music. Wes handed me a beer before sitting beside me. "You look tired." "I've been working too much." "You always say that." I smiled. "Maybe because it's true." He studied me for a moment. "No." "What?" "You're carrying something." I looked into the fire. "I'm fine. You don't have to tell me." He took a slow sip of his drink. "But you're not fine." For a second, I almost told him. Not everything, just enough. Enough to admit I felt trapped. Enough to admit I was losing myself. Instead, I laughed quietly. "I guess I'm not as good at pretending as I thought." "You never were." I looked at him. "What does that mean?" "The first day I met you," he smiled faintly, "you smiled with your mouth. I frowned, but not your eyes." The words hit harder than they should have. Nobody had ever said something so accurate, not even my wife, especially not my wife. Driving home that night, silence filled the car. Eventually, she spoke. "My dad worries about you." I glanced at her. "He does?" "He asked if everything was all right." I forced a smile. "That's nice." She nodded. "He says you've looked lonely lately." My throat tightened. Lonely. That was exactly the word. Winter came quickly. Work became busier. Family visits became less frequent. I should have been relieved. Instead, I caught myself wondering what Wes was doing, whether he'd finished renovating the garage, whether he'd taken that fishing trip he'd mentioned, whether he'd finally replaced the old truck he'd been complaining about. I hated myself for thinking about him so often. One evening, I opened social media while waiting for dinner. My wife had tagged the family in new photos from Thanksgiving. I clicked through them. Smiling relatives, kids running through leaves, her mother laughing. Then there was one picture of Wes standing alone beside the lake behind their house, hands in his coat pockets, looking toward the water. I stared at it far longer than I should have. "What are you looking at?" My wife's voice startled me. I locked my phone immediately. "Nothing." She laughed. "You looked guilty." "I was just reading something from work." Another lie. She kissed my cheek before heading back into the kitchen. I sat there feeling like the worst person alive. Christmas arrived. Snow covered the neighborhood. Their house smelled like cinnamon and pine. Everyone exchanged gifts in the living room. When it was my turn, Wes handed me a neatly wrapped box. "I saw it months ago. You didn't have to get me anything." I wanted to. Inside was a beautifully restored vintage pocket knife. the same model I'd once mentioned my grandfather had carried. I looked at him in disbelief. You remembered? Of course. You told me about it when we fixed the deck. That conversation had happened nearly 6 months earlier. I hadn't expected him to remember a single detail. Thank you. He shrugged. You'll use it. I will. And I meant it. Across the room, my wife smiled. Dad always gives thoughtful gifts. He really does. I couldn't stop looking at the knife, not because of what it was, because someone had listened closely enough to remember. That evening, snow started falling heavily. Several relatives decided to leave early before the roads became dangerous. We stayed to help clean up. Eventually, the house grew quiet. Only 4 of us remained. My wife and her mother loaded the dishwasher, while Wes and I carried empty boxes into the garage. Cold air rushed inside as he opened the side door. He rubbed his hands together. Winter came fast. It always does. For a few minutes we worked without speaking. Then he suddenly asked, "Ree?" "Yeah." "Are you happy?" The question stopped me completely. I looked at the concrete floor. My first instinct was to lie. Always lie. Always smile. Always say everything was fine. But something about the way he asked, calm, patient, without judgment, made the lie catch in my throat. I don't know. The words escaped before I could stop them. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he picked up another empty box. "I appreciate your honesty." I laughed bitterly. "I don't." He looked at me. "No. I've spent so long pretending to know what I wanted." I shook my head that I don't even recognize myself anymore. Neither of us spoke after that. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt understood. When we walked back into the house, my wife smiled. "There you two are." Wes answered before I could. "We got distracted talking." She laughed. "You always do." I smiled along with everyone else. But for the rest of the night, one question echoed in my mind. "Are you happy?" For the first time in years, I admitted the answer was no. After Christmas, I stopped pretending the problem would solve itself. It wouldn't. If anything, it was getting worse. Not because Wes was encouraging it. He wasn't. He had never crossed a line, never flirted, never looked at me in a way that suggested there was anything unusual between us. That almost made it harder. Everything I felt existed entirely inside my own head, which meant there was only one person to blame: me. January was quiet. Work picked up again, and my wife seemed relieved that life was returning to normal. One evening, she curled up beside me on the couch. "We should think about buying a bigger place." I looked away from the television. "What?" "If we're going to start a family." The sentence hit me like cold water. "A family?" She smiled. "I've always wanted kids before 35. I stared at her. She wasn't asking. She was planning. She was imagining a future I'd never been honest enough to tell her I couldn't give her. "You don't sound excited," she said softly. "I'm just surprised. You knew we'd talk about it eventually." "I know." She rested her head against my shoulder. "I think you'd make a great dad." The guilt was unbearable because she believed every word, and I couldn't even promise I'd still be her husband a year from now. A week later, I received a call from Wes. That alone surprised me. "Hayden? Hey, I hope I'm not interrupting." "No, not at all. I've got a favor to ask." I smiled despite myself. "What do you need?" The shelves in my workshop finally gave up. You mean they collapsed? They surrendered with dignity. I laughed. Yes. I figured you're the only person I know patient enough to help me rebuild them. When? Saturday? I hesitated. Only if you're free, he added quickly. I don't want to get you in trouble. I looked toward the kitchen where my wife was making coffee. I'm free. Perfect, thanks. When I told my wife, she barely looked up. Dad finally convinced you to help him. I guess so. She smiled. You two always enjoy those projects. I tried not to react to that sentence because she wasn't wrong. Saturday morning was cold and clear. Wes's workshop sat behind the house smelling of cedar, machine oil, and old tools. He handed me a mug of coffee. I remembered. What? 2 sugars. I blinked. You remembered that too? He shrugged. You've had coffee here enough times. It amazed me how attentive he was. Not just with me, with everyone. He remembered birthdays without reminders, favorite meals, stories people had told years earlier. He listened because he genuinely cared. That was the dangerous part. It wasn't just that he was attractive. He was kind. For hours we measured wood, installed brackets, and argued over the best way to level the shelves. You measure too much, he teased. You don't measure enough. They're shelves. They're crooked shelves. They have character. They have gravity. He laughed so hard he nearly dropped the drill. You're impossible. So I've been told. Around noon we stopped for sandwiches. He sat on an old stool while I leaned against the workbench. You know, he said, this reminds me of when my daughter was little. I smiled. Did she help? Help? He laughed. She mostly handed me the wrong tools. Sounds about right. She insisted every screwdriver was a hammer. I laughed. I can picture that. His smile softened. She used to follow me everywhere. There was so much affection in his voice. It reminded me of something I'd been trying not to think about. This wasn't just a man I admired. He was my wife's father, the man who had spent decades loving and protecting her, the man who trusted me. That realization settled heavily in my chest. After lunch, we carried lumber from the truck. One of the boards slipped unexpectedly. Without thinking, Wes reached for it. I reached too. Our hands collided. The board landed safely. Neither of us let go immediately. Only a second, maybe less. He looked at me. You all right? Yeah. You almost caught your fingers. I wasn't paying attention. He nodded. You've seemed distracted lately. I know. He didn't push. He simply picked up another board. That was who he was. He never forced conversations. He waited until people were ready. By late afternoon, the shelves were finished. He stepped back with folded arms. I have to admit they're straight. Barely. I rolled my eyes. You'll never admit I was right. Probably not. We laughed together for a moment. Everything felt painfully normal. As we locked the workshop, snow began falling. Light at first, then heavier. You should probably wait a bit before driving. I'll be all right. He looked at the sky. I've lived here 40 years, so I know when these roads are about to become miserable. I sighed. Fine, I'll make coffee. We sat in the kitchen while the snow piled against the windows. The house was unusually quiet. His wife had gone shopping with friends. My wife was visiting one of her cousins. It was the first time Wes and I had ever been completely alone inside the house. Neither of us mentioned it. The conversation wandered from work to books to travel to old family stories. Hours slipped by. At one point, he looked at the clock. We've been talking for nearly 3 hours. Have we? He smiled. I guess we solved every problem in the world except the shelves. They're perfect. I knew you'd admit it eventually. He laughed again. Then his expression grew thoughtful. Can I ask you something? You can ask. You don't have to answer. I nodded. What made you marry so young? The question caught me off guard. I was 29. Still, I stared into my coffee. I thought it was time. Time? Everyone else was moving forward, so you felt pressure. I didn't answer because he was right. I've seen people make big decisions for that reason, he said quietly. It rarely ends well. I looked at him. What if it's already too late? His eyes stayed on mine for a long moment. I don't believe it's ever too late to tell the truth. Those words settled deep inside me, not because they solved anything, because they terrified me. Telling the truth would destroy lives. Mine, my wife's, his entire family. The silence stretched until headlights swept across the front window. My wife must be back, he said. I stood. I should go. He walked me to the door. Outside, the snow had almost stopped. As I reached my car, he called after me. Hayden! I turned. Drive carefully. I will. And he hesitated. Whatever you're carrying, I waited. You don't have to carry it forever. I nodded once, unable to trust my voice. Driving home, I realized something that scared me even more than my feelings. Wes saw that I was unhappy. He just had no idea why. After that Saturday, I started avoiding Wes. Not because I wanted to, because I needed to. It sounded ridiculous, even inside my own head. The man hadn't done anything wrong. He'd been nothing but kind to me from the day we met. The problem wasn't him. It was the fact that every conversation with him made it harder to go home and pretend everything was normal. So I stopped answering his occasional texts right away. If he sent me a picture of the finished workshop, I'd wait until the next morning to reply. If he asked how work was going, I'd keep my answers short. I convinced myself distance would fix everything. It didn't. It just made me miss talking to him. My wife noticed the change before anyone else. You've been quiet with Dad lately. I looked up from my laptop. Have I? You two usually text about something every week. I've just been busy. She studied me for a second. You know what? He really likes having you around. The guilt returned immediately. I know. He says you're one of the few people who will actually listen when he starts rambling about woodworking. I smiled faintly. I like hearing him ramble. The words slipped out before I could stop them. She laughed. I know you do. A few weeks later, we were invited to Sunday lunch. I almost suggested we stay home. Instead, I forced myself to go. The moment we pulled into the driveway, I saw Wes outside washing his truck. He looked up and smiled. About time. I walked over. You're starting without us. I figured if I waited for you, this thing would never get clean. You've got high standards. I've got dirty roads. He handed me a second sponge without asking. I laughed. You planned this, maybe. For the next half hour, we washed the truck together like we'd done it 100 times before. Comfortable, easy, dangerously easy. You've been avoiding me. His voice came so casually that I almost missed the words. I kept rinsing the hood. I haven't. He looked at me with the same calm expression he always wore. You don't have to lie. I sighed. I've just had a lot going on. I figured he wasn't accusing me. He genuinely sounded concerned. I didn't do something, did I? That question hit me harder than anything else. No. You sure? Absolutely. He nodded once. Good. That was it. No interrogation, no pressure. He simply accepted my answer, which somehow made me feel even worse. Lunch was louder than usual. Relatives filled every chair. Someone's toddler was running circles around the dining room. My mother-in-law kept insisting everyone take more food. Normal, ordinary, exactly the kind of family gathering I'd always imagined wanting. Yet, I felt completely detached from it. Halfway through dessert, my wife reached for my hand under the table. I squeezed it automatically. Across from us, Wes happened to glance up. Our eyes met for only a moment, then he looked away. There was nothing unusual in his expression, nothing at all. I was the only one making everything complicated. A month later, everything changed. My wife came home a folder. We got it. I frowned. Got what? The mortgage pre-approval. She smiled so widely it almost broke my heart. We can start looking for houses. I stared at the papers. She was excited, talking about neighborhoods, schools, backyards, painting rooms, building a future. Every sentence felt like another brick being placed on a foundation I knew couldn't hold. That night, I barely slept. A few days later, Wes called again. I need to return something. What? The tape measure you left here? I laughed quietly. You called over a tape measure. I could have mailed it. I live 20 minutes away. Exactly. I knew what he was doing. He was giving me an excuse to visit. Not because he suspected anything, because he thought I'd been overwhelmed and wanted to check on me. Come by after work, he said. If you're sure, I'm sure. When I arrived, he was sitting on the back porch with 2 mugs of coffee already waiting. I figured you wouldn't want tea. You figured right. He handed me the tape measure. There, mission accomplished. You drove 20 minutes for this. I also wanted company. I smiled despite myself. So did I. The admission slipped out before I could stop it. Neither of us commented on it. We sat in comfortable silence for several minutes. Birds chirped in the trees. A dog barked somewhere down the street. The world felt strangely peaceful. You know, Wes said eventually, when I was your age, I looked over, I thought adulthood meant always knowing what you were doing, and he chuckled. I've been improvising for 30 years. I laughed. That's comforting. It should be. He leaned back in his chair. Most people are pretending. I looked into my coffee. I'm tired of pretending. The words came out almost as a whisper. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he nodded slowly. I know you do. I don't know what you're pretending about. He looked toward the yard, but I know what it looks like. My chest tightened. You've looked exhausted for a long time. I am. You don't have to earn the right to be honest. That sentence lingered between us. You ever regret anything? I asked quietly. He smiled sadly. Every person my age has regrets. What about big ones? He thought for a while. My biggest regret, he folded his hands together, was waiting too long to tell people the truth. I felt my pulse quicken. What truth? That I wasn't happy. The answer surprised me. I stayed in jobs too long. He looked down. I ignored problems because I hoped they'd disappear. He smiled faintly. They never did. I wanted to ask if he'd ever stayed in a marriage too long, if he'd ever loved the wrong person, if he'd ever looked at someone he couldn't have. Instead, I stayed silent. As I stood to leave, he walked me to my car. Hayden? Yeah. I hope you know something. What? No matter what's bothering you. He gave me the same steady look that always made me feel seen. You don't have to go through it alone. I nodded. Thanks. I mean it. I know. I drove away with tears burning behind my eyes. Not because I wanted him. I already knew that. Because for the first time in years, I wanted to tell someone the truth. And the person I wanted to tell most was the one person who could never hear it. The lie finally started to crack on a rainy Tuesday. Not because someone caught me, because I couldn't recognize myself anymore. I was sitting in my office long after everyone else had gone home, staring at an email I hadn't read 3 times already. My phone buzzed. It was my wife. "How's work?" I typed back automatically. "Almost done." Another message appeared. "Dad asked how you were doing today." I froze. Even after weeks of keeping my distance, Wes was still asking about me. I stared at the screen for nearly a minute before replying. "Tell him I'm all right." It was becoming the sentence I hated most because it was never true. A month later, we finally started looking at houses. The first one was too small. The second needed too much work. The third had everything she'd ever wanted. A large backyard, a quiet street, an extra bedroom. She walked through every room smiling. "I can already picture Christmas here." I nodded. She squeezed my hand. "What do you think?" I looked around the empty living room. I didn't see furniture. I didn't see children. I saw another prison built out of good intentions. "It's beautiful," I said, and I hated myself for saying it. That weekend, the entire family gathered again. This time, it was Wes's birthday. The house was louder than usual, full of old friends, neighbors, cousins, and relatives I barely knew. I spent most of the afternoon helping set up tables in the backyard. At one point, Wes walked over carrying a box of lights. "I was wondering if you'd gotten lost." I was hiding. He laughed. "From who?" I looked around dramatically. "Your relatives." "Fair enough." He handed me one end of the lights. "Help me always." The words slipped out naturally. He smiled. "I appreciate that." As we worked, he glanced over. He looked tired again. "I've been sleeping badly." "For how long?" I shrugged. "A while. You should probably stop carrying the weight of the world." "I don't know how." He tied another light to the fence. "No." He looked at me. "I don't think you ever learned." I stared at him. He continued working as though he hadn't said anything profound. Later that evening, everyone gathered around the patio. Someone suggested a toast. One by one, people shared stories about Wes, his patience, his generosity, his terrible jokes. When it was my turn, I hadn't planned to say anything, but everyone looked at me expectantly. I stood slowly. "I haven't known Wes as long as most of you." He smiled from across the table, but I took a breath. "I've met a lot of good people." The yard became quiet. and I've met a lot of kind people. I looked directly at him. They're not always the same thing. He looked almost embarrassed. You've made everyone around you feel important. I swallowed. You listen. You remember. You make people feel seen. My voice nearly caught. I hope one day I'm half the man you are. Silence, then applause. Wes shook his head with a modest smile. You're giving me too much credit. I don't think I am. For a split second, something passed across his face. Not discomfort, not suspicion, just emotion. He looked away first. Driving home that night, my wife reached over and rested her hand on my arm. Dad really appreciated what you said. I meant every word. I know. She smiled out the window. He told Mom once that you reminded him of himself when he was younger. That surprised me. He did. Yeah, he said, you think too much. I laughed quietly. He's probably right. 2 weeks later, everything I'd been avoiding finally happened. It started with a simple question. We were eating dinner, nothing unusual. Halfway through the meal, my wife put down her fork. Hayden? Yeah. Are you still in love with me? The room suddenly felt very small. I looked at her. She wasn't angry. She wasn't accusing me. She looked scared. What makes you ask that? She gave a sad smile. You answered my question with another question. I couldn't speak. She looked down at her plate. I felt you slipping away for almost a year. The words landed like stones. I kept telling myself it was stress. She laughed bitterly. Then work, then exhaustion. Her eyes met mine again, but none of those explained the way you look at me. My heart pounded. How do I look at you? Like you're trying very hard. Tears gathered in her eyes. And trying isn't the same as loving. I closed my eyes. She already knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. I don't want to hurt you. I know. That's never been my intention. I know. You're my best friend. She smiled sadly. That's what I was afraid you'd say. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, she whispered, Is there someone else? The question echoed through the room. I could lie, one more lie, protect everyone, or I could begin telling the truth. There isn't another relationship. She waited, but I couldn't breathe. There are feelings I don't understand. She nodded slowly. I thought so. You did? You've been grieving something. She reached across the table and took my hand. I just didn't know what. The kindness in that gesture almost broke me. I'm so sorry. So am I. That night we sat on opposite ends of the couch until nearly 2 o'clock in the morning. We talked honestly for the first time since we'd been married, about expectations, about fear, about how we'd both confused comfort with forever. She admitted she'd noticed my distance long before the wedding. I admitted I'd hoped marriage would somehow change me. It hadn't. When the conversation finally ended, she looked exhausted. So, she wiped her eyes. What happens now? I answered with the only truth I had left. I think we owe each other honesty. She nodded, even though it hurt. The next morning she packed a small overnight bag. I'm going to stay with my parents for a few days. My stomach dropped, not because she was leaving, because I knew exactly whose house she was going to. Jell's. And I had no idea what she was going to tell him. As I watched her car disappear down the street, one terrifying thought refused to leave my mind. Sooner or later, Gela was going to learn that my marriage was falling apart. I spent the next 3 days waiting for my phone to ring. Every vibration made my stomach tighten. Every notification made me think, this is it. Gel knows he hates me. He's going to call and ask what I've done to his daughter. Instead, nothing. My wife sent a single text the first evening. I'm okay. Mom's making too much food like always. I smiled despite everything. I'm glad you're with them. She replied a few minutes later. Dad says to stop living on takeout. I stared at the message. Even now, with his daughter staying in his house after our marriage had started to unravel, he was worried about whether I was eating properly. It was such a gel thing to say that I had to laugh. Then the guilt came rushing back. By Friday evening she came home. She looked exhausted, so I asked quietly. She sat across from me at the kitchen table. They know. I felt my pulse quicken. Everything. I told them we're having problems. I swallowed and my mom cried. I nodded slowly. My dad, she paused, mostly listened. That didn't surprise me. What did he say? He asked if we were being honest with each other. I closed my eyes. That's exactly what he'd ask. She gave a tired smile. Yeah. She hesitated before continuing. He also asked me something strange. What? He asked if you'd seemed unhappy for a long time. I looked down. I told him yes, and he just nodded. That sounded like Wes, never rushing to conclusions, never judging before he understood. He didn't blame you. Those 4 words hurt more than blame would have. For the next couple of weeks, my wife and I settled into a strange routine. We weren't pretending everything was normal anymore. We slept in separate bedrooms. We talked politely. We divided chores. There wasn't any shouting, no slammed doors, just 2 people acknowledging that something fundamental had broken long before either of us admitted it. One night, she knocked gently on the guest room door. You awake? Yeah. She leaned against the frame. I've been thinking about what you keep saying. You don't understand your feelings. I do. She studied me carefully. I don't think that's true anymore. I couldn't answer. Hayden? Her voice was kind. Do you think you might be gay? The room became completely silent. There it was, the question I'd spent my entire life avoiding. I looked at the floor for what felt like forever. Finally, yes. The word came out barely above a whisper. She closed her eyes, not because she was shocked, because hearing it aloud made it real. I think I've known for a while, she admitted quietly. I just hoped I was wrong. I'm sorry. I know. She walked over and sat beside me. I need to ask one more question. I nodded. Is there someone you're in love with? My heart started pounding. I couldn't tell her. Not yet. The words refused to come. She watched my face. Then something changed in her expression. Not anger, recognition. Oh, she stood slowly. Oh, my stomach dropped. What? She shook her head. No. She looked genuinely horrified. No. What? She wrapped her arms around herself. It's someone I know. I stayed silent. She whispered, Isn't it? Every instinct screamed at me to lie, but I had promised honesty. Yes. Tears filled her eyes. I don't want to know who. I nodded. Not tonight. The following Monday my phone rang. The screen read, Wes. I stared at it until the ringing almost stopped before finally answering. Hello? Hey, Rays. His voice sounded exactly the same, steady, warm. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. No. I wondered if you'd like to grab lunch. Lunch? That was it? You don't have to if you're busy. No, I answered too quickly. I mean, yes, I'd like that. Tomorrow. Tomorrow works. We met at a small diner halfway between our workplaces. The kind of place with cracked leather booths and coffee that never seemed to stop coming. Wes was already there when I arrived. He stood and gave me a brief hug. It caught me completely off guard. You look tired, he said. I probably do. We ordered sandwiches for several minutes. We talked about work, the weather, his truck, anything except the obvious. Finally, he set his coffee cup down. My daughter told me, "You're separating." I nodded. I'm sorry. So am I. He looked out the window for a moment. I know this can't be easy. It isn't. No. He folded his hands together. I want you to hear something from me. I waited. I don't hate you. The words almost made me cry. You don't? No. I hurt her. Yes. He didn't soften that truth. But hurting someone isn't always the same as deceiving them. I looked at him. You tried to become the man you thought you were supposed to be. I felt my throat tighten. That doesn't erase the pain, he sighed. But I don't believe you ever set out to destroy her. I didn't. I know. We sat quietly for a while. Then he asked, "Can I ask something personal?" You can. Have you figured out why you were unhappy? There it was, the opening, the moment I'd feared for months. I could almost hear my own heartbeat. I have. He nodded slowly. You don't have to tell me if you're not ready. I gripped my coffee cup. I think I spent my whole life trying to be someone else. He didn't interrupt. I kept thinking if I tried hard enough, my voice cracked, I'd become that person. Wes's eyes never left mine, and I can't anymore. He nodded. I understand. I looked at him in disbelief. You do? More than you think. Before I could ask what he meant, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. I've got to get back. We stood outside the diner. As we reached our cars, he rested a hand briefly on my shoulder. I'm proud of you. I stared at him. For what? For finally telling the truth. He got into his truck before I could respond. I watched him drive away, one sentence echoing in my mind. More than you think. I had no idea what he meant, but for the first time, I wondered if Wes had his own untold story. I couldn't stop thinking about what Wes had said. More than you think. The words followed me through the rest of the week. I'd replay the lunch over and over, wondering if I'd missed something. His expression, his tone, the way he'd hesitated before saying it. Maybe he had simply meant he understood what it was like to spend years pretending to be happy. Maybe I was reading too much into it. I'd become very good at doing that. The separation became official a month later. There wasn't a dramatic fight, no lawyers shouting across conference tables. We sat together in our living room with cups of coffee that had long gone cold, and talked about how to divide our lives. I'll keep the apartment until the lease is up, I said. She nodded. I've been looking at a place closer to work. Okay. Silence settled between us again. Finally, she smiled sadly. You know what's strange? What? I'm angry. I nodded. You have every right to be. I know. She looked at me for a long moment. But I'm not angry because you're gay. I looked up. I'm angry because we both spent years trying to make something work that neither of us really understood. I swallowed. So am I. She laughed quietly. What a waste of energy. We were scared. Yeah, she wiped at the corner of one eye. We were for the first time in months. We hugged without pretending we were still husband and wife. It felt like saying goodbye to the future we'd imagined and making room for one we couldn't yet see. A few weeks later, I signed the lease on a small apartment across town. It wasn't much. 1 bedroom, 2nd floor, a tiny balcony overlooking a parking lot. But when I carried in the last box and closed the door behind me, something unexpected happened. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel trapped. I felt terrified, but free. My phone rang that evening. It was Wes. Settled in. I smiled despite myself. Who told you I moved today? My daughter, of course. Need help assembling furniture? I think I can manage. You think? I've got instructions. He laughed. That's your first mistake. The following Saturday, he showed up anyway with a toolbox. I brought coffee. You also brought half a hardware store. You'll thank me. He was right. Within an hour, we'd assembled bookshelves, fixed a loose cabinet door the landlord hadn't noticed, and replaced a faulty smoke detector battery. You can't help yourself, can you? I asked. But you see something broken and immediately start fixing it. He smiled. I've been accused of that. We stood side by side in the little kitchen. For a brief moment, it felt remarkably ordinary. Then I remembered how extraordinary the situation really was. My former father-in-law was helping me settle into my new home. When we finished, we stepped onto the tiny balcony with fresh mugs of coffee. The afternoon was quiet. Cars drifted by below. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, I broke the silence. I owe you an apology. He looked at me. For what? For everything my choices put your daughter through. He leaned against the railing. You've already apologized. I know it doesn't change the past. No, he nodded, but I believe you mean it. I do. I know. That simple answer carried more grace than I felt I deserved. A week later, my ex-wife called. I wanted to check on you. I'm all right, I figured. We talked for nearly an hour, not as spouses, as two people who had survived the same storm. Near the end of the conversation, she grew quiet. I should tell you something. What? I talked to Dad. My stomach tightened about us, about everything. I waited. He asked if you'd finally admitted who you are. I smiled faintly. I have. I told him you had. She hesitated. And then he said something I didn't understand. What? He said she searched for the exact words. I'm glad he finally chose honesty over fear. Those words sounded exactly like Wes. Spring arrived. Life slowly settled into routines that no longer felt borrowed. I started seeing a therapist. I came out to my younger brother. That conversation was terrifying. It ended with him hugging me so tightly I could barely breathe. I wish you told me years ago, he said. So do I. One truth made the next one a little easier. Not painless, just possible. One Sunday afternoon, Wes invited me over to help plant vegetables in the backyard. I almost declined. Then I realized something. For weeks, I've been measuring every interaction by the feelings I was trying to suppress. Instead, I needed to decide what kind of man I wanted to be. So, I went. We spent hours digging rows, arguing over tomato spacing, and laughing whenever one of us got covered in dirt. As the sun began to set, we sat on the back steps overlooking the garden. "You seem lighter," he said. "I think I am." "What changed?" "I stopped lying." He smiled. "That's usually where healing starts." I looked at him carefully. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask." "At lunch?" I hesitated. "You said you understood more than I thought." His expression softened. "I did." "What did you mean?" He was quiet for a long time. "When I was young," he said slowly, "there were people I cared about who spent their whole lives hiding who they were." I listened without interrupting. My older brother had a best friend. He looked out across the yard. They loved each other. My breath caught. They never said it publicly. They couldn't. I stayed silent. They spent decades pretending to be nothing more than friends. He smiled sadly. By the time they finally had the freedom to live honestly, he shook his head. They'd already lost so much time. I understood. "That's why you kept asking if I was happy." He nodded. I recognized the look. We sat together in silence, not awkward, not strained, just honest. As I stood to leave, he said my name. "Race." "Yeah, I'm proud of the man you're becoming." Emotion tightened my throat. "Thank you." He smiled. "You've still got a long road ahead." "I know, but at least it's finally your road." I drove home with the windows down, letting the cool evening air fill the car. For months, I'd believed the story was about falling in love with the wrong person. Now, I understood something different. It had really been about finally becoming the person I'd spent my whole life trying not to be. People assume the hardest part is coming out. It wasn't. The hardest part was learning that telling the truth doesn't magically fix everything. It simply gives you the chance to build something real. Sometimes that meant rebuilding relationships. Sometimes it meant accepting that some things couldn't be repaired. And sometimes it meant letting go of dreams that had never truly belonged to you. The divorce was finalized in early summer. There was no celebration, no sense of victory, just a judge asking a few routine questions before signing papers that officially ended a marriage both of us had tried desperately to save. Outside the courthouse, my ex-wife and I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment. She laughed softly. "I always thought this day would feel different." "Me too." She looked toward the parking lot. "I don't hate you, Hayden." The words hit me harder than I'd expected. "I don't hate you either." "I know." She smiled, though her eyes were wet. "I hope one day you stop apologizing for existing." I blinked. "What?" "You've apologized for being yourself since the day I met you." I couldn't answer. She stepped forward and hugged me. "I hope you find the life you were too afraid to chase." When she pulled away, she smiled one last time before walking to her car. That was the last time we hugged. Life settled into something quieter. I kept going to therapy. I made new friends. I came out to the rest of my family, one conversation at a time. Some people embraced me immediately, others needed time. A few never accepted it. That hurt. But it also taught me something. Living honestly doesn't guarantee acceptance. It guarantees self-respect. And after spending most of my life without that, it was enough. Nearly 4 months passed before I saw Wes again. His wife had organized a small barbecue. She invited me herself. "We're still family," she'd said over the phone, "if you're comfortable coming." I almost declined. Then I realized avoiding everyone forever would only keep me trapped in the past. So I went. Some things had changed, some hadn't. The backyard looked exactly the same. The lights still hung above the patio. The old grill still took too long to heat up. Kids still ran through the grass laughing. For the first time, though, I wasn't pretending to be someone I wasn't. It was strangely peaceful. Wes found me standing near the garden. "You made it." "I wasn't sure if I should." "I'm glad you did." We walked slowly toward the vegetable beds we'd planted together months earlier. The tomato plants were taller than either of us expected. "I guess we did something right," I said. He chuckled. "Most things just need time." I smiled. "That's becoming your answer to everything." It's usually true. After dinner, people drifted into smaller conversations. The sun began to sink behind the trees. I found myself sitting beside Wes on the old wooden bench near the fence. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, I broke the silence. "I need to tell you something." He looked over calmly. "You don't owe me anything." "I know, but I owe you honesty." He nodded once. I took a slow breath. "This is probably going to make things awkward." "Maybe." I spent a long time trying to understand why I was so unhappy. He listened without interrupting, and when I finally understood, I looked down at my hands. I realized I'd confused a lot of different emotions. He stayed silent. "I admired you. I respected you. You were the first man who ever made me feel completely accepted." My voice shook, and for a while I swallowed. I convinced myself that meant I was in love with you. The words finally existed outside my head. The secret I'd carried for so long was no longer a secret. Wes didn't react immediately. He simply looked out across the yard. The breeze moved gently through the trees. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "Thank you for trusting me enough to tell me." I nodded, unable to look at him. "I've been afraid of this conversation for over a year. I imagine you have. I'm not telling you because I expect anything. I know. I'm telling you because I don't want another lie between us." He smiled gently. "I appreciate that." I finally looked up. There was kindness in his eyes. Nothing more, nothing less. "I care about you deeply, Hayden." "I know, and I always will." He paused, but not in the way you're describing. The words stung, not because I'd expected anything different, because hearing them made the last lingering fantasy disappear. "I understand. I think," he continued quietly, "that what you saw in me wasn't someone you were meant to build a life with." I frowned slightly. "I think you saw the kind of man you hoped you could become." I sat there absorbing that. "You were looking for permission." He smiled. "Not a husband." A laugh escaped me before I realized I was laughing. "You might be right. I usually am." There he is, the terrible joke. He laughed too. For the first time since all of this had begun, there was no tension, no impossible hope, just two men sharing an honest conversation. Before I left that evening, Wes walked me to my car one last time. "I've been thinking," he said. He smiled. "I don't regret meeting you. I've regretted hurting your daughter every day." "I know." He rested a hand briefly on my shoulder, just as he had outside the diner months before. "She'll be all right." "I hope so." "So do I." He looked at me with that same calm certainty I'd admired from the beginning. "Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "Don't spend the next 20 years apologizing for the first 30. I felt my eyes sting. "I'll try." "No," he smiled. "You'll do it." I saw my ex-wife a few months later for coffee. She looked happier, lighter. She'd started dating someone who made her laugh. Watching her smile didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It gave me peace. "I'm glad you're doing well," I told her. "You too," she tilted her head. "Dad says you finally smile with your eyes." I laughed. "He still notices things. He always will." We finished our coffee talking about ordinary things: work, books, mutual friends. For the first time, there was no weight between us, only gratitude. It's been 3 years now. I'm writing this from the balcony of a different apartment, one with room for too many plants and a dog that insists every squirrel is a personal enemy. I've built a life that actually feels like mine. I've dated, I've fallen in love, I've had my heart broken again. But every joy and every disappointment has belonged to the real me, not the version I invented to make everyone else comfortable. I still see Wes from time to time at family gatherings. He's still the steady, thoughtful man I admired from the beginning. Only now, when I look at him, I don't see the life I thought I wanted. I see the person who unknowingly gave me the courage to stop hiding. People sometimes ask when my life truly began. They expect me to say it was the day I came out, or the day my divorce was finalized. They're wrong. It began much earlier. The day a man handed me a glass of champagne at my wedding and quietly asked if I was all right, because he was the first person who noticed that my smile never reached my eyes. And once someone truly sees you, it's almost impossible to keep hiding from yourself.